mentioned earlier that for many of us, how and where we work has changed, and organisations are making long-term decisions about where their people work. But Accenture research has found only 35% of women are satisfied with their company's approach. Now, the pandemic and disruption of the last 3 years has led to really a reckoning with the meaning of work and the value that we assign to work. We've heard of much so-called quiet quitting, but we've also seen several high-profile women actually quitting leadership roles in politics and in business. So what's at stake for working women? In our new research on workers in Ireland today, we found that 46% of women surveyed said they've considered either downshifting or leaving the workforce altogether this year. Almost 1 in every 2 women. And the truth is, it's not a lot better for men. 1 in 3 men have also considered downshifting or leaving work completely this year. Now, they're really shocking numbers, and the reasons are revealing. So for women, the biggest driver is childcare. Childcare responsibilities are 36% of the reasons. In other words, pressure outside of work. And for men, the biggest driver at 38% is pressure and stress at work. So arguably, these are both cultural factors that are exacerbated by gender inequality. Women more likely to have caring responsibilities, and men more likely to have the pressure of being the breadwinner or the provider. So really, this is a wake-up call for leaders in Ireland today. Workplace culture matters. We have made incredible progress on policies about gender equality, but has the culture kept up with policy? So next we're going to hear from some leaders across different sectors in Ireland. And to introduce our first panel, please welcome the entrepreneur and broadcaster, Aine Kerr.
Good morning, everybody. Happy International Women's Day to you all, and I'm sure I speak for a lot of you in the audience. What an incredible performance by the choir just now. That little line, we are not alone. And I hope, if nothing else this morning, you had a little moment there of feeling you're amongst your community, your tribe, like-minded people. And over the next 25 minutes with this incredible panel, I hope we're going to inspire you into action, and we're also going to equip you with maybe some insights, ideas that you're going to leave here by lunchtime with something of an energy transfusion. Because what you heard from Michelle there is we all know where and how we work today has fundamentally changed. Our cultures, our workplaces. We live in a moment really of a perfect storm, it's probably fair to say, economically. A war in Ukraine, we're dealing with a cost of living crisis, inflation, and on it goes. And we can have that moment sitting here this morning of, well, what is actually within my control? What can I influence? And what are the things, yes, I have to accept? In this moment where change is our only constant. And we really have to grapple. I hope here, moments like this morning, we all have a hand on the lever. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the problems, but what we're going to try and do is convert our knowledge, our understanding, into real, tangible action here this morning. What does radical change, transformation actually look like? What does it actually look like? And I'm hoping the 4 incredible leaders that we have here are going to inspire us all into action. No pressure, guys. And to give you your introduction, we have Ruth Kennedy. Ruth is the Commissioner at Revenue. We have David McRedmond, is the CEO at OnPulse. We have Philly McMahon over to the far right, playwright and co-director at THISISPOPBABY. And we have Paula Neary, who's the Senior Managing Director, Communications, Media and Technology with Accenture. And you'll have heard from Michelle there just now, Hilary, just the stark research that Accenture has published this morning. And there are some lowlights in it. And we've got to grapple with just the reality of this moment that we find ourselves in, this moment of ambiguity and change, and a really hard 3 years, Paula, for people. Can you speak to just the lowlights of that research this morning, what you've really been struck by, and what are some of the root causes?
Yeah, thanks, Sonia. Yeah, as Michelle called out some of the low stats, to say low light of stats. So we have got 87% of women feeling burnt out. That's compared to 75% of men. So that's a huge stat as well. So a huge, percentage of people feeling burnt out. post-pandemic. Some of the areas they're citing is actually having to be more available for work, so that always-on piece. Feeling probably overwhelmed by extra responsibilities at home and at work. And then they feel that's coming at the cost of their physical and mental health and well-being. As again, the other stat that called out there, women, the majority of women conceal that, so they don't talk about it, so they conceal it for fear that it would, inhibit some progression. And then 47% saying that actually just they'll leave or they'll step back. And again, 35% of men are saying that as well. So that's a lot of people in your organisation saying that they'll just step back, whether it's caring responsibilities or the pressure or work. So they're feeling disconnected, but they're looking to their organisation for support. So they're looking for, a greater social capital now, a new value contract with their employer. They want us to care about their health and well-being. They want us to care about their financial well-being. They want us to give them a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging.
And in all of that, Ruth, like we've had 3 years of people talking about concepts like the Great Resignation, and we had the quiet quitting, and I think we're in this moment now of this quiet reflection. But if this research is true, what we are going to now see is people stepping back, namely women, because of burnout, because the other infrastructure isn't there. Does that concern you as a woman? Like, you've broken through the glass ceilings that we all aspire to, but does that give you real pause this morning?
Absolutely. It's really concerning for businesses because, revenue as an organisation, our mission is to serve the community. And it's really important that every business reflects both their customer base and the community they serve. So having a business solely, I suppose, populated by one gender or one ethnicity or one any group, it's not, we don't live in a homogenous society. So I think it's really important for businesses to thrive that you actually need that diversity and inclusion. So it's not just, it's a business problem as well as a problem for people. And there's such a pool of talent out there, and we have to really embrace it. And we need to look at how we can make it work for the business, for the individual, and for society as a whole. We're not working in isolation here.
David, you have been an incredible male ally for women and done extraordinary things through UNPUS, which we're going to come to as a good example of how to close the gender pay gap and get to diversity. But before we get there, talk to me about being a man in the boardrooms, in the rooms where it happens, when sometimes there aren't women there. Sometimes in some of our big corporations, women aren't in the room where it happens, and you are the man who has to put your hand up and go, so-and-so, Mary, Siobhan, she's got it, she can do it. Have you felt a real responsibility in those moments?
Yeah, look, I'm a massive beneficiary of a whole group, a whole cohort of women who have educated me and who have dragged me into the 21st century. My old Chief of Staff, Aoife Byrne, Vivian Jupp, who's here, great people like that, Debbie Warren, countless people, Rachel Hussey. These people actually enlighten me every day. And, I think of examples. I was on a board where they needed somebody to step in an emergencies chair. I stepped in. I was not the best qualified. A woman was much better qualified. And it should have been her. I was on another board where we were appointing an MD of the company. And they actually went out and brought in somebody from outside, which is often a good thing, brought in a man, and the woman in the company was streets ahead in terms of capability, and thankfully that's now been righted. But, clear examples of where, right in front of my eyes, in the last decade, there is a real palpable bias. And the only way to overcome that is to constantly be aware of it and to try and work, and what are the better ways of doing it? It's one thing I always say to my daughters, and it seems like a terrible bit of advice, me saying this. Whether you're a man or you're a woman, you have to put your hand up. I'll tell you one great tip for everybody here at work and everything, is the biggest fear I have is if somebody contacts me once to ask for something, And then a week later, I'm going, oh God, where did Ruth call me? What was it? I'm looking at, was it on LinkedIn? Was it on Messenger? Was it on Telegram? Where was it? And then I can't find it. Keep calling. It's much easier. It's very easy for me then to say, no, actually, you talked so-and-so or whatever. Keep hassling to get to the position. So, and Gillian Tett wrote about that this week in the Financial Times, about women are now in the boardroom, but they're not getting to the top seat. And I think that has to happen. But we also need women constantly pushing men to think, because we just don't think that way. You know, I think of other examples where I've been pulled up in language I used. I remember once saying, oh, we need an attractive person. And I knew what I meant. I meant somebody who is just going to be lively and out there. Boy, my chief staff went for me in front of the board and said,
good, you didn't
what
do
do you
that
mean
again.
by attractive? What do you mean? What do you mean? I'm going, well, I only mean this. And I stumbled and mumbled my way and all of that. And I remember thinking afterwards, yeah, you know, I get her point, but I was kind of right because I knew what I really want. But of course, I wasn't right. Yeah. And that's a great example of constantly do it, constantly tell us, because in the end, we're men and we're as hopeless as we look, you know?
But learning, evolving. Philly, David talked there about perpetual biases, and some we're aware of, some we aren't. We look around a city like this, so many of our streets named after men, statues to men, our storytelling, our histories, our museums, there's tended to be a particular lens. We don't need to get into a whole thesis around things designed by men for men, but this is something you really tried to grapple with through storytelling. What did you learn, and do you think we're getting better in terms of our awareness of how we tell our stories in Ireland?
Yeah, I think we have an island culture, and we have this kind of circular storytelling, and it began with kind of an oral storytelling, and then the written word. And for anybody that, like me, that cycled down the quays this morning, you know, you pass those bridges, and it's Beckett and O'Casey, and it's Joyce, and along the way, certainly in the last 100 years, these stories kind of entered the canon, and they were often written by, and they were about men. And for us, when we started to make theatre, we came together, we were unhappy with the stories that we were seeing on stages, and we felt that our own lives were not being represented. So we began by telling queer stories and working class stories and female stories, and we were interested in intersectionality before we even knew what that meant. We were which is kind of where it's at. And there's this great quote by an Indigenous Australian elder called Dr. Lilla Watson, which says, if you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's get to work. And so collectively, our artistic family, our troupe, we got to work together on telling these stories. And something amazing happened over the last 10 years, or the last 15 years, which was that Irish society, what was happening in politics, mirrored what we were doing on stages. And so our work became bound up with the marriage equality referendum and Waking the Feminists and the Repeal the Eighth referendum. And suddenly we were seeing that our stories were being platformed on bigger stages and screens. Internationally, we could see them. And that felt amazing, because it felt that the new Ireland that we had imagined together, or that we had proposed on stages, that Irish society was also doing the same thing quietly in the background, and that these things were coming together for us. And what's really important, what's really important now is that we tilt the lens again, is that we open that lens up even wider and say, what stories have we not heard now? And, we are blessed with new communities, with the city and the country looks radically different. What stories are we not hearing? And that's not about deplatforming anybody. I sit here sadly, as a middle-aged white man, feeling like I'm not being put out to pasture. I can still be heard. But I can also use my platform to kind of to help other voices as well. So for me, it's about how do we hear new stories in new ways? I want to hear radical, interesting, amazing stories from young people from new communities who are going to blow me out of the water, because I've done my thing over 15 years. Yeah.
Great. So Paula, I think we've had a nice scene set just of the current status, but we know we got to keep pushing on, more work to be done, and given how stark it is, in this moment, if the Accenture research is telling us this is what it looks like and feels like for men and women out in the working world today. What type of change do you think is now needed to get to grips with this problem here and now? Because it's all lovely for us all to come into the convention centre today and define the problem, but if we're not leaving here going, there's 2, 3 things that we all have the hand on the lever for. What does that look like?
Yeah, no, we do. I mean, this is an opportunity to reimagine our world of work. And we really need to put purpose at the core of that and a life-centric approach to that, I would say, and show the value of, earning people's commute. Why do you come into the office? For connection, collaboration, celebration. So I would highlight 3 areas around that life-centric approach to work now, learning and leadership. A life-centric approach is we need to put purpose at the centre, but we need to care about people's health and well-being. We need to make them feel connected. And we also need to give them work autonomy, like where and how they do their work, once we just measure the outcome and impact that they're having. And we need to use technology to enable that. People want a frictionless experience now, and actually AI can take, away a lot of work that they don't need to do and let them focus on human work, which is more engaging, the creative, the problem solving, the connection, the human side of work to get people engaged. For learning, in times of uncertainty, if people feel they're getting relevant, marketable skills, that will get them focused and feel invested in. So I think all organizations can have a digital skills strategy. They're the skills that are needed, to be relevant in tomorrow's world, and help people, increase their digital fluency. And that needs to be not the HR learning department, that needs to be centre business agenda. Learn through your role, a culture of feedback, really commit to that and make people feel invested in, and then they won't fear change. And it also helps with the reskilling agenda, because actually we need all these skills, and actually, that for companies. And I would say for leaders, they need to be active listeners. They need to be care and consider, people's personal health and their development and how to help them be productive. And we need to support that. We need to role model it. It needs to start with the top, but it has to come right down into all people managers, because it's behaviours every day. It's all those, pieces that people talk about. It's those interactions. They make a difference. Every call out, and they're the behaviours that need to be recognised and rewarded. And, they're the behaviours that progress. And it is for everyone. As our previous IWD research said, when she rises, we all rise. So this is for everyone, and everyone wins in that more equal and inclusive environment.
Thank you, Paula. Ruth, Paula mentioned there a few times the word purpose. And in the Revenue Commissions, you're celebrating your centenary this year. And like when we think of the level of transformation in those 100 years and all of the milestones, and you are history making in terms of being top chief at the Revenue Commissions now. But when you think about your remit, which is very much public service driven work, how important, as you think about talent and retention, working men and women, is it now connecting that history of 100 years, that public service driven work, to that sense of purpose?
Yeah, as you said, we are marking 100 years and 100 years of serving the community. And we're running a number of exhibitions at the moment for that. And in one of those exhibitions, I saw a letter that Michael Collins wrote in September 1922. He wrote it from Cork to W.T. Cosgrave. And he was worried about the state of the nation. And most particularly, he was worried about money and how they would get finances. And in the letter, he said we really needed to secure the finances of the state, and we needed to collect the taxes and the customs duty. And to do that, he said, we need to set up a board of 3 independent men to run the tax and customs administration. And I mean, it was just a sign of its times. It wasn't anything odd then. And probably even for many years that followed, it wasn't odd at all. I mean, I wouldn't have known, other than when I joined the civil service, that actually up till 1973, some of you probably remember, when you got married in the civil service, you had to leave if you were a woman. So you had your career, you got married, and then you were told your place was in the home, and you left. That is not that long ago, 1973. So we have had 3 men running revenue up until 1998, when Josephine Feely was the first female commissioner, and went on to be chairman. And actually now it's taken again till 2022, when I was appointed as the second female. But revenue has a huge female footprint. We're 62% female in the workforce, and over the last number of years, we have definitely grown the senior leadership to now, at the very top level, 16 heads of division and 3 members of the board were 47% female. And that's really important in attracting and retaining talent. And the way we attract and retain has changed over many years. And I think now we had such a seismic change with COVID, with remote working, that we can now offer new opportunities, different opportunities, and work with purpose. And I think that's what people crave. They want to see the impact of the work they do. And we were all really proud in revenue during the pandemic, where we could actually flip the technology we'd invested in to actually support businesses and support the entire community, paying out wage subsidy schemes. Who thought revenue, who collects tax and customs, would actually be paying the nation and are probably the biggest debtors with a huge amount of debt warehousing? But it just shows the agility and the resilience you have. And actually people are drawn to that and can see a really long, diverse career in revenue, and we can offer them the flexibilities everybody needs to support everything they have going on inside and outside work.
David, when you were being very honest there with your confessions earlier, I was struck by, is it easier sometimes to give that feedback for all of us to articulate the change we want to see in the world around us when we're in the room, eyeballing that person, having that chemistry, having that sense of connection? And is it harder now in a remote first world, a distributed first world, sometimes to amplify the why we need more diverse teams, why we need more diversity in the boardrooms? Is it just harder? Have we over-rotated sometimes, I worry, to the work from home? And where do you kind of stand in that blend when you listen to how stark the findings are today?
Yeah, and the findings are really interesting. I had this conversation with Ruth beforehand with probably slightly different views in it, but one of the great things we discovered in the pandemic was working from home, was flexibility, was technology, was an inventiveness, and that was a fantastic discovery. One of the things I think we lost was the future. I think we're slightly stuck in what in the pandemic I call the ever-present. Working from home is very efficient. You get things done, you manage things, you do things. But that's it. And for me, the real issue is about how do we create the future? You know, and I look in this room, and there's quite a lot of Gen Y and Gen Z here. And I want Gen Y and Gen Z to be collaborating with me, or probably without me, even better, together to be able to create the future. It's your time. We've done our best to screw up the world. You should have your chance. So it's about time you all had that opportunity. And I was dealing with somebody in the UK who's a leader in her field, and she'd be about 31, 32, and she said, she's getting together with people of her own generation. I said, we need this to happen. So for me, the office, it's an onus on me to make sure that the office is a good place to come to. It's a creative place. It's a fun place. One of the big things about work that I think we lost in the pandemic is it's meant to be fun. You know, it's meant to be fun. You're meant to fall in love. You're meant to do things at work. You know, let's create the environment where people can collaborate and get together again, but let's not lose what Ruth is talking about in terms of flexibility, technology. Use those things so we can get that work-life balance. One of the dangers of the burnout is the belief that we can do it all from home. And actually what you're doing is doing 2 jobs in one. And sometimes the separation can be helpful as well. So I think we need to be really conscious of what that is. But most of all, I want people getting together, having those conversations about what's the world going to look like in 10 years' time.
Philly, what we're talking about here requires everybody and in the audience to play big. But in order sometimes to play big, we need just the basic hygiene factors. We need the childcare, we need the livable communities, we all want to pay our rent or pay our mortgage, and we need livable cities. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you see it now, but where do we need to get to?
Well, I think big business specifically needs to advocate for more gay clubs. Go with me on this. Big business needs, thank you. Big business needs to advocate for late night cafes. Big business needs to advocate for more theatres, for more galleries, for cycle lanes. Because when you try to attract national and international talent, and a 25-year-old rocks up to Dublin and they can't dance to techno till 6 a.m. on a Saturday night and then get a sandwich on the way home, you are not competing with other cities. And so we're in danger of this city that we rely on its charm. We're actually in danger of this. We're kind of drifting into a hostile city, right? And for those of us that are making culture in the city, and we believe in the soul of the city, right? We believe in creating a city that people can live in first and tourists want to come to second. And we believe also in a city that people that have emigrated can come home to. So, but for those of us making that, this city has become stretched. It's become almost impossible to live in. You know, I have friends that are raising family, you know, with young children that are moving to London because it's cheaper and there are more work opportunities. And so if you imagine a Dublin without any culture, and if we can just like for a second imagine it, there's no gigs, there's no galleries, there's no theatre, there's no Viking Splash Tour. Like, what is left? What are you recommending to people? Right, they've gone to see the deer in the Phoenix Park. What else are you recommending to people, right? And so we have to preserve that. And it's in big businesses' interests to preserve that. So it's in big businesses' interests to work with cultural organizations, to work with artists. And it's in all of our interests. Like, what am I doing on a daily basis to encourage and promote culture in my city? Am I buying an extra ticket? Am I saying to people in the halls of power, sponsor a theatre company? I'm available to talk after this talk. So just how are we working together, business and culture, to say, look, what city do we want to live in together? And then, like, we can attract all of the talent, but they're not going to stay. Dublin is not somewhere. You know, if I come and I have a one-bedroom apartment, which is €2,000, and I have to go home at 2:30 a.m., I ain't staying here, you know?
You raised a really great question there, and we're actually out of time.
I've got solutions
this went
later
way
on.
too fast.
Later on.
But you had a great question in there, which was the what am I doing? And hopefully our audience are thinking about that now. And I'd love to give you each 30 seconds. If there's a mantra you'd love to leave the audience with, if there's a question you want them to grapple with, my favourite is always, what would you do if you weren't afraid? It's a great one. Facebook taught me years ago. But is there something you'd love? We said we'd come on stage, inspire people into action, but hopefully equip them, maybe with a question, to do, even at just one thing everybody will leave here at lunchtime on foot at this panel to commit to. So Paula, do you want to go first? 30 seconds.
The time is now. This is happening now. So go back into your organisations and let's solve it together, cross-industry, with the arts, with the government, and do it now. And do it for all for the Gen Z and Gen Y, all the young women in the audience, including my daughter here today. Let's do it now for them, because we should look back and say, wow, they were brave, not lament that we didn't take action.
Great, well said. Ruth?
I think mine would be that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and be kind to yourself. Allow yourself the time. When you need to focus on different things at different times, let yourself dial it up and dial it down as you need to. But be kind to yourself and be kind and support those around you.
Great, well said. David?
It's what I said, create the future. I'd say to all of you, go into your workplaces, say to your bosses, say, I want to get a group of people together and for us to spend half a day or a day talking about what the future looks like in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. Do that, and always put your hand up. And never be afraid to do that, please.
Great, well said. And Philly, last word.
I think that we can. I think we can dream up the city that we want to live in. I think that cities don't change quickly. We can't do everything overnight. But I think that we need a kind of a dream space about, like, where do we want to live in 5 years or in 10 years? And I think that for all of us, it's very easy for us to complain, but how are we contributing? So, contribute to the city. Let's talk about active citizenship and how we can kind of build the thing together.
Okay, love it. Please give a warm round of applause to our amazing panel. And up next, we have Dana back on stage, who is going to introduce her song, The Little Girl. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.